Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. Our topic in this lesson is going to be attacks, and more particularly attacks against the king that involve sacrifices right in front of the king, a castle position on g7 or g2, of course, if we're talking about a white king. So let's get to our very first example. Here we are. Let's examine the position in front of us. One of the first things we can see that black presumably just played f5, attacking the white knight on e4. Okay, now the next thing is to establish what's the material balance. Well, the experienced eye can tell pretty quickly that it's an exactly equal position when it comes to material, each side having exactly the same number of everything. Okay. Next thing is to establish that both kings are on opposite sides, and therefore the game has a very tense and dynamic ambiance. We can also see white has the upper hand in that white has the two rooks on the half-open g file doubled. So that's certainly going for white, and even without making any calculations, which by the way is definitely needed in this position, we can tell that white has the upper hand. Why? Because there is material balance. White has an open g file for his rooks to attack the enemy king, and there's honestly not too much going for black. It's true that black has the c-file open against white's king, but we can see how that king can move to b1 if needed at any given time. A queen in itself is not a very strong attacking piece when there are so many defensive pieces on the other side. We can see how the white queen not only attacks towards the king's side against black's king, but is right there near the king, protecting it as well. The same goes for the white bishop on d3, and also white has a healthy pawn formation right in front of his king on the king's side. The white knight on b3 is also ready to help in defense whenever it's needed. And the main problem is that black really doesn't have any pieces aiding the queen against the attack on the king. So with that said, we can establish that pretty much on any move white makes, well, not quite any, but any move with the knight, obviously not hanging the knight, white will have some advantage. However, the game could continue for many more moves if white fails to notice the opportunity given, the brilliant opportunity given for white to actually end the game real quick, because in reality white has a way to force checkmate in just 5 moves. I suggest you try to figure out what that sequence of moves may be, and then come back, listen to the solution. Generally speaking, when you have a lot of pieces in an attack, like in this case, you have pretty much 5 pieces participating against the black king. The white queen is aiming there, the knight on e4, the bishop on d3, the 2 rooks doubled up, and even the little pawn on h5 can become an important factor in the attack. So that's certainly a hint to look for a way to strike, to transform the nice looking attack to an actual win. And it's very often that in such situations the position is ripe and the attack is ready to succeed. Okay, so right now what white would like to do is get his knight to f6. So that's one of the moves to look at. However, after pawn takes knight, it's not so simple how to continue. So therefore, in order to accomplish this goal, white can and should immediately sacrifice the rook on g7. Okay, rook takes back and check. Beautiful. This forces the king away from the knight, and now queen captures knight. Now if the rook blocks the check on h7, white is happily checkmating with rook g8. But how about the knight moving to h7 right now? How can white make progress right now? White is done an exchange for only one pawn. Of course, white's attack is pretty good looking no matter what, but at this point white needs to be careful because black has the material upper hand. However, due to the fact that black is still undeveloped, the bishop on c8 hasn't moved yet, and that results, of course, the rook in the corner not being in the game either. And as you shall see, it really becomes important right now that after the beautiful combination of queen takes h7, rook h7, black does not have sufficient defense on the g8 square and white checkmates. What a beautiful combination. And again, you can see two things to conclude from this. One is that it's really important to develop timely, which black didn't do in this game. And two, when you have an army of pieces attacking the enemy king, it's usually the time to start looking for a combination that will culminate in checkmate or significant material gain. Let's move on to our next example in this lesson. Here we are. In this position, which is also from a practical game, it was white's turn. But before we go any further in that direction, let's evaluate what's going on so far. Well, white has given up 2 pawns to develop an attack on the king's side. And indeed, white has the rook on g3, which certainly is good looking, and so does white have the queen on h5, the bishop on c1, even though it hasn't moved, it's ready to be deployed at any time for the attack. It's right there waiting to get involved in the action. And last but not least, the little pawn on f5 can be also a key player in this attack. On the other hand, if it was black's turn, black could make some defensive moves and everything would be okay for black. But time is the essence, and if white plays correctly here, black will not have the time to defend in this game. I suggest you take some time. I would give you about 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, and try to figure out what may happen, what should white do next. Of course, I recommend not moving the pieces around. Try to do the analysis, visualize it in your head. Don't move the pieces around. Okay, good luck in figuring it out. Just like in the previous example, the combination, the sacrifice, here also arrives on the g7 square. Okay, well, this is a rook sacrifice, and unlike in the previous example, here black does not even get a knight for the sacrifice, a pawn, that's it. Well, first of all, let's see what happens if black accepts the sacrifice. Generally, when you're considering a combination, you're considering a sacrifice, the first things to look at is what if they actually accept the sacrifice. Why? Because that will mean that you will be behind in material, and that will require precise and concrete calculation to make sure your combination works, either by you winning at least the material back, or winning more, or giving checkmate. So that's why let's check out what happens if black first just captures the rook. Well, white needs to act quickly before black will get the time to escape with the king towards the other side of the board. So white's best option right now is to play queen h6. Now the black king is in a check and cannot go to f8 to run to the other side. It needs to remain either on g8 or on h8. If the king goes to g8, the hero becomes the little pawn by advancing to f6, and black has no way in guarding the g7 square where the checkmate is about to arrive. Okay, so let's put those moves back and check out king h8 instead in this position. Well, now f6 would not accomplish the goal because black would get to defend the g7 square by playing rook g8. See, it's a very typical difference in similar scenarios. So what should white do? Well, make another forceful move, check. Now that the king is forced to g8, so the rook will not be able to get there, then involve the bishop with bishop h6, and voila, now the bishop is helping. Black cannot prevent the upcoming checkmate with the queen on g7. Well, this seems not that complicated, is it? However, the game continued differently. After rook g7, black had a creative idea and captured with the bishop on f5. Well, what is this all about? You will find out real quick. First of all, black protected the h7 pawn where white was about to arrive with a checkmate. Okay, but what happens if white just captures this bishop? Well, now black had another interesting idea in mind and played bishop g1, a very tricky move with the idea to then, if now white would take the bishop, which by the way would be a big mistake, the black queen would get into the defense by queen b6 check, an intermediate move, and then the queen is controlling all those squares on the 6th rank, and after the king moves out of the check, black can safely capture the rook, and black would be still in the game thanks to the queen's defense from the 6th rank. So let's go back and look at this situation, which is something very typical. In such situation, white needs to focus on what he is doing, and that is trying to checkmate black's king and ignore the distraction. And that means in this case to simply play king h1 and not to let the black queen get involved in the defense. Of course, now black is busy because white is about to checkmate on h7, and no more checks in sight means that black has no choice but to capture white's rook. But the question is how to continue now. And again, it was really important for white to foresee the continuation on what to do right now. And the beautiful move is bishop h6, another sacrifice, the bishop this time, with the idea that if king takes, which black did in the game, check forces the king all the way out to h5, and the game ends with a beautiful checkmate, bishop f3. What a beautiful combination. Again, what did we learn from this example? We learned that when we have numerous pieces against the king, especially like in this case, without black having much defense around the king other than the pawns, it's definitely the time to consider action. Action meaning maybe a sacrifice, a combination to open up the files, the diagonals against the king, and let those attacking pieces work together. And what's important, time is the essence, because if black would get the opportunity to, for example, play f6 if it would be his turn, and that would involve the defense of the queen from the other side of the board, black would be just fine. But as we saw, white doesn't wait, acts right away, and the winning combination is rook takes g7. And let's see our next example, which is a very nice one as well. In this position, for a change, it was black's turn. White is offering in this position to trade bishops on the dark squares. Well, if that's what black would do, white would obviously recapture and the game would be continuing in a more positional manner. However, the moment arrived for black to act. Black has the queen out, aiming towards white's king, and so is a very well positioned knight on f4, and in addition a bishop on c8, which true haven't moved yet, but is very actively involved already anyway in the attack. So black is ready to act, and let's see what happened in the game. As you know, the subject of this lesson is sacrifices on g2 or g7, so it's no surprise that this is black's first move. And the king captured. And now a second sacrifice with bishop to h3. Well, let's see what happens. In the game, white captured back on h3. Obviously, if the white king moves out of the check, the rook on f1 is hanging, even though it may be a better choice than what white did. King captured on h3, queen f3, and now, of course, not up, but back to h2. So what do we have so far? Well, black is down a piece, white has an extra bishop, but black has 2 pawns. So generally speaking, when you get 2 pawns for a sacrificed bishop or knight, and the opponent's king has been exposed, as it is right here, it's a very reasonable combination, and you may go for it, even by purely the understanding that it's sufficient compensation. Because 2 pawns is almost 3, so it's almost equaling to a piece, and the fact that the white king is in a vulnerable position without any pawns defending it, it compensates for just that one lacking pawn as the 3rd pawn. The question right now is, though, how to continue to develop an attack against white's king before white would consolidate his position and actually be better. If white would get to play like rook g1, maybe rook g3, and double up the rooks, white actually would have the advantage because black would be too late in creating a realistic attack against the king. But black had a brilliant idea here and continued by playing rook to a6. It's an absolute urgency to bring pieces to attack white's king. Now, the beautiful part about this move is that it sacrifices the bishop on c5, with the idea to make yet another sacrifice to open up the 6th rank, attack white's queen, by the way, at the same time, and of course, if pawn takes, swing the rook over, and announce checkmate after rook h1. Wow, how brilliant is that? Well, obviously, white can foresee all of this coming and do something different, and that's what white did. White was trying to get rid of the black queen being on f3 and being dominating as it is at the moment, and therefore white played queen d1. Naturally, being down in material, black shouldn't even consider trading queens, unless of course it would mean material gain. Therefore, black continues with queen e4, again offering white the opportunity to take on c5, but black would continue still with the same idea of knight d4 to open up the 6th rank to get involved for a black rook in the attack. And again, black would be winning. White instead continued with rook g1. Now remember, the white bishop for the time being on e3 is guarding the h6 square, so now black needs to still improve his position. Came queen h4 check, forcing the king to g2, and now, of course, the king is on the g file and the g6 square is available for a black rook. Black now therefore played knight d4, sacrificing again. White took the sacrifice and the rook will come to g6, but first black simply took on d4, attacking the white bishop, Now if that bishop simply moves away, the plan is simple. Check, king f1, check again, king e2, d3, and now when the king has no choice but move to the first rank, then rook takes, checkmate. Very nice. Let's go back one more time and see what happened in the game. White now, as we see, cannot avoid losing the bishop by moving it. So White wanted to give it up under his own terms, moved it to g5 with the idea that when Black captures it with a check though, the king will move to f1 and White will create a discovered attack against Black's queen to gain a little bit of momentum. But nevertheless, Black's position here is clearly superior, because if you count material, you see that Black already has 4 pawns for the knight, which is already a material advantage, and of course the attack still continues because the White king is still not in a safe zone. Queen f5, came bishop c2, queen h3, check, rook g2, and rook f6. So the attack continues. Black now is about to play d3, opening up the diagonal of the bishop on c5, and then rook f2. White played queen d3, trying to prevent that pawn push, but rook f3 chases the queen away. Now if queen moves to some random place, then indeed the d-pawn advances. White now captured on h7, but that of course pretty much equals with resigning, as after these trades on h7, Black simply is up 3 pawns. And at the grandmaster level, that's certainly a resignable position. So it was game over. And let's see our final example in this lesson, where in this position, White earlier in the game has sacrificed an exchange. But we can clearly see that White has a more active position and a nice passed pawn on the d-file. However, in this case, White is ready for attack, and again the justification for that is that Black has his pieces in a passive position, many of them on the queen side, on the back rank as a matter of fact. White has a beautifully positioned bishop on the long diagonal on b2, in fact both of them, and White pieces are ready to cooperate really nicely, as we shall see. So, as we're used to it already in this lesson, knight g7, king takes, and knight f5. So you can see how nicely the flow continues with forceful moves coming one after another. Now Black is in check. The king better avoids moving to another square where the White queen will arrive giving a check, so therefore the king moves to h8, and queen comes closer to the action to h6, threatening checkmate immediately. Now Black's problem is that if the bishop would come back to defend and to attack the queen, White wouldn't move the queen but would capture on f6 with a check and win right away. Therefore, the game continued with rook g8 to try to protect the g7 square, and now again the problem is that White captures the bishop on e7. All of a sudden, the f6 knight is in serious trouble. The White bishop is about to capture it. If, for example, queen takes knight, bishop takes knight, winning Black's queen, and otherwise all the Black pieces are hanging, including the 2 rooks. Black played knight bd7, protecting the knight. Now White is of course already in an easily winning position. Let's see how the game ended. Knight took the rook. If queen takes, then the knight falls on f6. Black played rook g6, and even better than just moving the queen away, knight d6, saving the knight. A very fine little move. Queen b6, and now knight c4, and Black simply resigned. What a nice combination. So, what's the moral of this lesson? Watch out for that square in front of the king after it castled on g2 or g7. When there are 3, 4, 5 pieces heading all in that direction, attacking a king, oftentimes the time is mature for a combination. Hope you enjoy these nice examples and come back next week for some more chess ideas. Bye bye.